At Survivor Series 1991, Bobby Heenan declared, "Hulkamania is dead, Monsoon. Long live The Undertaker!" for just a few days until the ill-fated Tuesday in Texas show happened and Hulk Hogan used the ashes from the urn to regain the WWF Championship. And then Jack Tunney, who had the personality of Driftwood and Cabbage put together, said, "I'm the president. The title's held up. 30 men at the Royal Rumble match in 1992 will compete, and whoever wins will be the champion." Ric Flair won, and then he went on to defend it against Randy Savage. Hulk Hogan took on Sid Justice, Sid Vicious, Sid and Nancy Vicious, maybe not that last one. In the main event, it was supposed to be Hulk Hogan's last match, and it was his last match for about a year. And then The Undertaker, who was just champion a few months prior, took on Jake the Snake Roberts in Jake the Snake Roberts' last WWF match for nearly 4 years. He was granted his release, was going to go to WCW, and did go to WCW, but then Bill Watts took over, and Bill Watts is no fan of Jake the Snake Roberts and said, "Haha, your $3.5 million contract, zip." I think it was probably for less than 3.5, but who the hell knows. It was for a lot more money than Vince was willing to pay him, and it got knocked to about 200 to 250 grand, and Jake had to take that. So yeah, Undertaker, after being champion, a big goddamn deal, making his debut just a year prior, winning the championship from Hulk Hogan a year later, held it for 8 days. Yeah, weird time period for the championship. From Survivor Series 91 to WrestleMania 8, there were quite a few title changes, and you didn't get to see that all that often, especially in those days. But what if The Undertaker had held the championship longer? And I'm not talking just for 16 days or 24 days or even, say, just a month. What if he had held it for multiple months? Would that have worked? Would it have flopped? Certainly couldn't have gone any worse than WrestleMania 8 did inside the Hoosier Dome, even though there's some great moments. So, let's talk about these scenarios, shall we? I'm John Rentham with my real honest thoughts on what if The Undertaker had stayed WWF Champion into 1992. I believe it was Kane Gaming on Twitter that had suggested this. If it isn't Kane Gaming, I apologize for getting your username wrong. There's a lot of shit jumbling in my head. Thank you very much for suggesting this. Thank you. I do appreciate that. I will get to other ones that have been suggested to me in due course. I'm trying to film a bunch of these while A, I have the energy, and B, I have some time off from work because I'm going to be very, 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 very busy for the rest of the month. And also, Royal Rumble season is coming up very soon. WrestleMania season, I'm going to be very busy doing that stuff, and also weekly stuff and movie reviews and all that. So let's get to this. So, since I'm only going to be covering The Undertaker's career until 1992, this will probably be shorter than other ones, but he was born in March of 65 in Houston, Texas. I do just want to give a quick shout out to the WWE biography episode on him with his mother, having to give her the subtitles. But the stuff with the mother was great. Now, he made his debut on June 26, 1987, and, wrestling in a lot of places. I mean, he wrestled in World Class. Fritz thought he looked like David. In all honesty, if you take a look at how Undertaker looked at that point, he was, Texas Red. He was under a mask and everything. His first match, I believe, was against Bruiser Brody. Oh, boy. That was certainly something. By the way, fuck Carlos Colon and Jose Gonzalez for killing Bruiser Brody. Fuck them both. They both deserve the worst, weirdest, most vile form of rot to just eat them from the inside out. Anyway, because they never faced repercussions for that. Now, that being said, world-class stint. He was also in Memphis. One thing that I did enjoy on that biography, and you can check out my reviews of all the biography episodes on the Old School Wrestling Review and Documentary Review playlist. But he had a stint in South Africa that I did not actually know had that much wrestling, and I kind of hope that maybe somebody, if you can find any of that stuff from the Steve Simpson, I believe is his name, from the South African promotion, if you can find any of that stuff that's pretty good video quality, please share it in the comments so I can check out some of that stuff, because it's always cool to find out stuff about this obscure wrestling, at least obscure to me. Now, he was. He did the world-class stint. He did the stint in South Africa. He did a stint in Memphis. And then they needed a new skyscraper. Jim Cornette had mentioned he called Dutch Mantel because he knew Dutch from years before. Cornette was in NWA WCW. We need a skyscraper. Dutch is like, well, I got one. Can we have him? Well, he's a really good kid. He's just green. He just needs some experience. And he could tell. And for any faults that I stand by, pointing out about The Undertaker, caving Canyon's head in because he was gay and a whole bunch of other stuff and everything, and being a bigoted piece of shit. Let me just say, as far as a talent, Undertaker, world class, and I'm not just talking about a stint in world class, Undertaker truly was a one-of-a-kind performer. And that much is clear. He went into WCW as part of the Skyscrapers. That didn't work at all because he was teaming with Dan Spivey. That didn't work. Sid got hurt. And then he was Mean Mark Callis for a bit. And that didn't work. And Ole Anderson basically said, nobody is going to pay to watch you wrestle. And then Undertaker got a call from Vince McMahon. He was worried he was going to be the Eggman Cuckoo Kachu, however the hell that's said. And then he debuts as The Undertaker. And look at the size of that ham hock. Can't do a Roddy Piper impression to save my life. But he debuts as part of DiBiase's team. He tombstones Coco Beware. Dusty met The Undertaker. Everybody met The Undertaker. Everybody meets The Undertaker at some point. But Undertaker had made enough of an impact. And he didn't get pinned. He didn't get beat. Well, I mean, except on the house show circuit because he faced off against the Ultimate Warrior in a bunch of body bag matches, which was just absolutely hilarious. And Undertaker had, he was a silent, silent moving. He didn't, he just, stilted moves. He wouldn't really sell all that much. He would kind of go back like this. He'd be more of a giant, even though he proved he could wrestle. Vince wanted him to be almost like a movie monster type. And it worked. It worked. It scared me as a goddamn kid. At 9 years old when he debuted, I remember seeing that on tape because I had a buddy that his uncle recorded that stuff. And man, I'm going to tell you, I saw that. I think I saw it like a few days later. It was Thanksgiving weekend. So I actually saw it like a week later when I went over to his house. And that was really, really, it's like, Jesus. I was like, okay, no. Because at 9 years old, you don't goddamn know. I mean, hell, I was a fan of the Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan back then. But that being said, Undertaker did quickly, gain a lot of popularity because people were terrified of him, but also he proved he could do some good stuff. I mean, he could do the tombstone. He could do the Don Jardine walk across the top rope. And that was really impressive. That was cool for me to see. And I had seen a little bit in WCW, but I didn't put together that it was the same guy because I was 9 years old. Now, looking back on it, you can see, my God, just how great he was for a number of years. And then they built up this thing because you got to think they only had 4 pay-per-views that year. Now, they were going to have 5 this year, but they had the Royal Rumble, which he was in. They had WrestleMania, where he beat Jimmy Snuka, and Jimmy Snuka should have faced The Undertaker and been tombstoned and planted in the goddamn ground years before that because of getting away with the murder of Nancy Argentino. And then he would have the aforementioned matches against, Ultimate Warrior and body bag matches. And he would eventually get to a match with Hulk Hogan at Survivor Series 91. The Gravest Challenge. And Ric Flair would show up. I mean, Ric Flair and Hogan had been kind of going back and forth. Paul Bearer had done the funeral parlor thing and had done all this and, his own talk show. Because everybody had a goddamn talk show because they were trying to recreate Piper's Pit. Which I'm not saying was the first ever talk show segment, but it was the first most popular talk show segment. And the idea of Flair and Hogan possibly facing off, what happened is Flair would put a chair, in the ring while all this crazy shit was going on with Hulk Hogan and Undertaker. And Undertaker would tombstone Hogan on the chair, even though there was about 50 years of daylight between it, but, he wanted to take care of Hogan. And Hogan tried to say, oh, you accidentally planted me on the chair and caused nerve damage. And then Undertaker saw 2 years later, wait, no, I didn't. There's no way I did. The whole point is that Undertaker had won the championship. And then what happened is he lost it Tuesday in Texas. Was part of the Royal Rumble 92 match where Hogan ended up eliminating him after a few minutes in the match. And then Jake the Snake Roberts still wanted to attack Randy Savage and Miss Elizabeth, despite the fact that Randy Savage had beaten him at Saturday Night's Main Event. And then Undertaker, and I still love this. I remember this to this very day, just joking and making an ex-girlfriend laugh. But it was a clip where they had it backstage, and he's about to, Jake Snake Roberts has got a chair, and then Undertaker grabs it. That's my favorite chair. Give it back. Ah. And then that would lead to WrestleMania 8. And then Undertaker from there would go on to face off against Kamala and Giant Gonzalez and stuff like that. But if we just focus on the time period between Survivor Series 91 and WrestleMania 8, there are multiple scenarios you could come up with. One, that he somehow manages to retain at Tuesday in Texas, because Hulk Hogan gets DQ'd, and they decide to maybe go with Hogan and Flair not needing the championship at WrestleMania. say we go with say we go with the Royal Rumble 1992, but we go with just it being a number one contenders thing. Now that does take away the luster of the 92 Rumble, one of my favorite, or pretty much my favorite Rumble of all time. It's that, and maybe 2016 was actually pretty good, but there were some others. There were some others that were good. 92, however, would still be the pinnacle. I'm not talking about the AEW group. Say Undertaker faces off against, you wouldn't have to. You could have him face off against Hogan, and you could have Flair do something where Flair would end up, interfering and causing something, and he could do that. Or you could have him face off against... I'm trying to think about the faces at that time. You could have had him face off against Slaughter. Slaughter could have wanted to do it for America. You could have done something because at that point the title wasn't necessarily the draw. Undertaker could have been the champion, retained the championship against either Hogan. You could have had him against Randy Savage there. And then, say Jake the Snake Roberts had cost him. There you go. Have something like that happen, because I'm literally just going with a whole bunch of scenarios in my head, because there's a lot of different ways you could go about it. Jake the Snake Roberts costs Randy Savage. Randy Savage enters the Rumble, still does that whole thing where he chucks him over the top rope and then chucks himself over the top rope, and then they have to say you have to be propelled over the top rope because Randy Savage was so goddamn fired up and intense. Piper could still win the Intercontinental Championship, because even though Piper being WWF champion would have been cool, him at that point being a part-timer and how he would be gone after WrestleMania 8, him facing Brett would have been okay. You could have had Brett face off against him, but Brett had a flu. Actually, he had the Intercontinental Championship taken off of him because he was possibly going to go to WCW, but then found out he couldn't get out of his contract till September or October of 92, and by that point, Bill Watts was well and truly into ripping up contracts, and Brett wouldn't have gotten all that much money, and in all honesty, Brett in WCW 92 working against Pillman and others would have been cool, but guess what? Wouldn't have worked, and Brett's career would have halted. And I love Brett. I love Brett. My favorite wrestler of all time. And if you guys don't agree, that's fine. You can be wrong. I kid. We can all have our favorite wrestlers. And hey, let me know your favorite wrestler in the comments, please. You can let me know your favorite all-time, your favorite current. So anyway, Undertaker could have done that. You could have done all those scenarios in the Rumble. You could have had Undertaker retain, face off against Hogan. Or I'd say do the one against Savage. Because Savage could have taken the loss, and then you go on with that. Hogan and Flair could have come down. You could have had a double elimination. And you could have had it where Hogan and Flair want to have maybe a number one contenders match or something like that. Or maybe they need to decide this Ultimate Clash, and you do that at Mania. But then that raises the question, where does that leave Randy Savage? This is where one of the scenarios comes in. Now, you could have had Hogan beat Taker at Mania. You could have had that. Would have left Sid out in the goddamn cold. You could have had Sid versus Savage, but then where does that leave Flair? So, you still go with Hogan and Flair. You maybe slot Sid in with somebody, have Sid have a match against somebody, run down, attack Hogan, and then that leads to the Ultimate Warrior's return. Go with the Savage thing. Savage against Undertaker, beating Undertaker in an Ultimate Clash, and there you go. He beats Undertaker. He wins it. He's put Jake in the rearview mirror. Because Jake at that point, Jake could have faced Sid. That actually would have been something, because then you still could have had Jake's last match. And Undertaker would have gotten a big championship, showcase at WrestleMania. Yes, it would have undercut the 92 Rumble, but you could have had that. Or you could have had Jake get the shot at Undertaker. You could have had Savage versus Sid, because I'm sorry, Sid versus Undertaker at that point, it couldn't have been any worse than the one that they had in 97. And I love Sid, don't get me wrong, but that was not a good match. You could have had Undertaker versus Jake. Jake, like, I made you, I, did this, I brought the dark, it's like, I embraced the dark, I was, you merely embraced the dark side, I was molded in it, brought up by it. I didn't even, you didn't even get to the dark side until I became a man. I totally screwed up that goddamn line. You get the point. He could have faced Jake and could have retained the championship. He could have had a longer run in the SummerSlam. I don't know if that would have worked, because I don't know if people would have bought it. And also, Undertaker didn't need the title all that long. So him versus Jake would have been cool. The ultimate culmination would have been Randy Savage, because Randy Savage would have then still gotten his run. Ultimate Warrior could have returned to help Hogan. And then Flair could have done what he did. Flair could have eventually beaten Randy Savage at SummerSlam. You could have had something like that, or you could have had Flair just have one little short run. Because as cool as it was to see Flair as champion out of the Rumble 92, I don't know if it was as well received. And I love Flair, don't get me wrong. It was a big goddamn moment. But this is just blue sky with alternate history. I think the Savage versus Taker one makes the most sense because Randy Savage, at that point, still had plenty of juice left in more ways than one. Not that he was the only one. But then he could have made a whole bunch of people. You could have had him face Brett, Shawn, all that. You could have him face Ultimate Warrior. You could have done a whole lot of things. There would have been a lot of cool scenarios. That's the one I'm going to go with. That being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Where do you think Undertaker's reign should have gone? Should it have ended Tuesday in Texas? Could they have done something? Could they maybe have had Undertaker put the title on the line in the 92 Rumble, lose it, and then gone into another feud? If we had gone with that, then he still could have faced Jake. You could have had Hogan and Flair compete over it. You could have had Flair somehow win the goddamn thing. Flair versus Savage, so where Savage still wins it. And then Hogan could have faced Sid Justice Vicious, and you could have just gone with that. That's a quicker scenario there. I still like my idea of Savage overcoming The Undertaker and slaying the monster. Anyway, agree, disagree what I said. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Rickland. I'll see you soon.